I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, the conclusion of the 31st Olympiad, the 2016 Summer Olympics in Rio de Janeiro. And for fans of the Olympics, it was quite a 2 weeks. The United States did very well, winning 46 gold medals, 37 silver and 38 bronze, 16 gold medals for swimming, and 13 in track and field. But another winner in the Olympics was the State of Israel. And joining us on our JBS phone to talk about Israel and the Olympics is Dr. Jeffrey Gurock, Professor of American Jewish History at Yeshiva University, someone you've seen often here on JBS. Jeff, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to speak to the JBS community.
Great. Jeff, you wrote a piece in the Jewish Forward, which was entitled, believe it or not, the Rio Olympics were great for the Jews. Why were the Olympics so good for the Jews, Jeff?
Well, I'm glad you said good for the Jews. I didn't write the headline.
I know.
I would have preferred good for the Jews because, as you know, we've talked about this many times, when I look at sports, I don't look so much at how many medals a nation won, although Israel did win two bronze medals in judo, and considering how much money they spend on their athletic program and the size of Israel, that's quite a remarkable feat. But
yes.
I'm more concerned with what sports says about the definition of community on the world scene. And sports is a community-defining situation. In other words, as a Jewish historian, one of the questions I ask myself is, are Jews allowed to participate on an equal basis with all other people? And again, it's not only a Jewish story, it's true of all minority groups. You know, I know that you and I revere Jackie Robinson. We often speak about the fact that the civil rights movement began to some extent when Robinson was allowed to play in our national pastime of baseball. Mm-hmm. So as far as the Olympics are concerned, this go-around, it's surprising that I'm able to say something positive about the International Olympic Committee,
yes,
which has had a long history of, in some instances, anti-Semitism, and in other instances, great myopia to the cause of Jews. So in this case, the best news about the 2016 Games is what's good for the Jews and good for Israel is that notwithstanding a lot of efforts over the last few months from BDS groups internationally to bar Israel from the international community of sports people, Israel was there. And for me, the defining moment was not only Israel marching in the opening ceremony, but the closing ceremony, Israeli athletes with all other athletes intermingling as they celebrated their athletic achievements. So that, for me, was a very important moment, and I guess it's a hopeful piece, and I guess one could say that perhaps somewhere down the line, another international organization much larger than the International Olympic Committee called the United Nations might take a cue from that in terms of withstanding pressure from Arab groups who in many instances have tried to marginalize Israel, kept Israel out of different activities of the United Nations. So kudos for once to the International Olympic Committee, which is a turn in their history.
Good for you. By the way, by any chance, did you get to watch the opening ceremonies?
No, I didn't. No.
So you never really got to see Israel marching in with the Israeli flag?
No, but I remember 4 years ago when, for 40-some-odd years, a group of heroic Jewish widows, the widows of the 11 martyrs who were murdered by Palestinian terrorists, petitioned the Olympic Committee to have some sort of memorial in London, and they refused. There was a private memorial run by the Jewish community in London, and when Israel marched in 4 years ago, a great Jew, he's not a Jew, he's a Gentile, named Bob Costas, a good person, he was the one to say, as Israel marched in, that we should remember the murder of the Israeli athlete.
Yes.
So this time around, an appropriate memorial, and I say appropriate, these are not my words, but the words of the widows who've campaigned over the years on behalf of the memory of those who were murdered, felt that the International Olympic Committee stepped up to the plate appropriately in terms of memorializing these Israeli athletes.
Now, just in case there's someone watching who's too young to remember, the 1972, it's quite a few years ago already, 1972, more than 40 years ago in 1972, at Munich, the Munich Games, 11 Israeli athletes were ultimately murdered at the airport by Palestinians. One of the things you reference in your piece is the way in which the Olympic Committee in 1972 chose to and not to, in some way, recognize, and there were people, Jeff, who thought the game should even have been suspended for a period of time or canceled. But I want you to just reflect, you remember 1972 and what the significance of that event was, and then contrast it to 2016 and the ceremonies, both at the beginning and the end of the Olympics, that really memorialized those 11 Israeli athletes.
Well, I intentionally did not identify the prime malefactor by name in 1972, who had a long history of anti-Semitism as far as the Olympic Games is concerned. In Jewish tradition, we often refer to Haman in the Purim story. We say, Yomach Shemo, his name should be obliterated. But I'll mention his name. His name was Avery Brundage.
Yes.
Avery Brundage, back in 1936, the Berlin Games, he was one of the people, he was not alone, as part of the American Olympic Committee, who didn't want to embarrass Adolf Hitler because of the possibility that two great Jewish runners, Sam Stoller and the very famous Marty Glickman, who became very famous as an announcer in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. He was the voice of the Giants and the Knicks, etc. Anyway, Brundage, who had a personal profile of anti-Semitism, was the head of the American Olympic Committee in 36, and he made clear that these two Jews would not be in one of the signature events in the Olympic Stadium, the 4x100-meter relay. There were Jews in the Olympics, and some of them were in minor sports. For example, basketball first appeared in the Olympics in 1936, but if sports fans among the viewers might be interested to know, the game was held outdoors on a wooden court, and it was muddy. It wasn't much of a game, but be that as it may. Brundage is there in 36. In 1972, he's now the head of the International Olympic Committee. And when the Israeli athletes are killed, they have 1 day of remembrance, and Brundage gives the keynote speech, which has a real irony now as far as 2016 is concerned, where he bemoans the fact that international politics have invaded the pristine Olympic Games, and his point of reference, 2 points of reference, one, that athletes, he doesn't even mention them as Israelis, were murdered, and secondly, that the apartheid Rhodesia in South Africa was being boycotted from the Olympics because of their racist activities. I think the irony is that in 2016, BDS groups have tried to project Israel as a modern-day Rhodesia.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
That's 1972. And one other piece about 1972, a number of Jewish athletes, American Jewish athletes, were spirited out of the Olympic Games, most notably Mark Spitz, who I think won 6 or 7 gold medals, eclipsed only by Phelps a few years ago, and he won all these medals as well. And they were exited from the Olympic Games. And I should point out that this time around, first in 2012, 2016 as well, a very heroic Jewish woman and a great gymnast, Ali Raisman, made clear that her Jewish identity was very important to her. 2012, in her floor exercise, she did her performance to the tune of Hava Nagila. And someone told me, and I can't confirm this for certain, but probably someone can check this on YouTube, that a Japanese gymnast did her routine to a Hebrew song, Gesher Tsar Me'od. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's just an indication of how she used that tune to project her athleticism. So 2016, the fact that finally, I mean, I don't want to go overboard in terms of my praise for the International Olympic Committee, but the fact is they did a number of notable things which they had not done in the past. One was the memorial for the Israeli athletes, and the second was the fact that their disciplinary committee spoke very strongly about that failure of the Egyptian judoists to shake hands with the Israeli who won the bronze medal.
Yes,
that
Jeff, hold on. I want to be sure everybody understands this reference you're making now. This was, from the Jewish perspective, the big story of the Olympics. An Egyptian judo athlete refused to shake the hand of the Israeli who beat him, Islam el-Shahabi, an ultra-conservative Salafi Muslim, lost a first-round match to Or Sasson. But when Sasson stretched forth his hand to shake hands at the conclusion of the match, the Egyptian turned, refused to shake hands, walked off the mat to the boos of the crowd. What do you make of that incident as you're describing here and trying to put in perspective how sports reflects the larger political scene?
Well, two things. First of all, as I indicated in the article, in many instances, the Arab countries were acting in character, refusing to non-recognition of Israel here in the sports metaphor is very, very important. And actually, there were three events. One, there were three incidences. One, going to the opening ceremonies, Lebanese athletes didn't want to share a bus with the Israeli athletes. That's number one. Number two is this Egyptian refusing to shake hands with an Israeli. And the third is that before the Olympic Games, in a qualifying meet, a Syrian athlete, amid all the war-torn activities, decide he was not going to fight against an Israeli boxer. So you have, again, this non-recognition played out on the sports arena, reflecting non-recognition, these Arab nations acting in character. But I guess the glimmer of good news from the Arab point of view, the Arab-Jewish point of view, is the fact that the Egyptian judoist was sent home by his own Olympic committee. Mm-hmm. Now, I did say in the article that it perhaps the Egyptian National Committee did this because they didn't want to incur any more criticism from the International Olympic Committee. I can't look into their hearts and protocols in what they did, but I do want to say that if that is true, then that's another good piece as far as implicitly the IOC standing up for doing what is right. The original version, or the original title of this piece was called Israel and the True Olympic Spirit. And the idea was that Israel was being accepted in the Olympics more than has been the case in the past. And I'll say one other thing, and that is, beyond the Olympics, there's always pressure on Israel in terms of non-recognition. Now, I'm not much of a soccer fan, but the fact is that geographically, Israel is located in the Middle East, if we haven't noticed it, but they play in the European leagues for championships because these Arab countries will not play against them. So this is not about sports. This is about international relations,
yes,
and it's played out through the metaphor of sports.
I want you to reflect upon how interesting this is, that it merits an article by Jeffrey Gurock. And by the way, I like your title much better than the one the foreword gave to your piece. But Jeffrey, this is 2016. We had the 36 Olympics. We had the 72 Olympics. This is 2016. And we're excited, Jeffrey, that finally the Olympics have included the Israelis to such a large and positive extent, despite the fact that you still have Arab countries that refuse to participate with Israel, shake their hand, or as you say, go on a bus with them. You know, the Olympic spirit that you were going to write about, or you were going to title your piece, the Olympic spirit is that athletes transcend politics, and certainly transcend the politics that pit one nation against the other. But lo and behold, the Arabs were not willing to get on the bus with the Israelis, refused to shake their hand, and you and I are celebrating as if some big deal happened for Jews in 2016, Jeffrey. One would have thought that by now...
I understand what you're saying, but my point was that in 2016, on the international scene, beyond athleticism, on a daily basis, Israel finds itself, I don't want to say outcast, but perhaps I should say outcast in terms of the family of nations. So that when you have a glimmer of recognition that this odious BDS movement is being stifled by the International Olympic Committee, how many billion people other than me watched the closing ceremonies last night? Okay, that is an indication, is a small sneakered step in the right direction. Now, they could have done more. They could have chastised officially the Lebanese contingent in terms of the bus dust-up. There's more to be done. But it's not that we're excited. It's the fact that there's so much negativity that something positive coming out of this is something that is worthwhile.
Yes.
And I wanted to say one other thing. Over the last day, since the article appeared, a number of people have said to me, your article was interesting, but in the write-ups in the New York Times, et cetera, when it talked about the major things that took place in the Olympics, nobody talked about the fact that the Egyptian didn't shake hands with the Israeli, et cetera. And my response is, there's a certain irony to it, that the best news was that we as Jews noticed it, but that it was just a small piece of a larger Olympic saga. In other words, it bespeaks a certain degree of integration. There are all sorts of problems in the Olympics. This was not a major problem. We were well integrated into that group, and the best type of integration for a Jew or any minority group is when the whole world is not talking about it. An event took place. There was an appropriate response by the International Olympic Committee, and the games went on in the right direction.
Very nice. By the way, speak for one moment about Ali Raceman. You referred to her in the 2012 Olympics. Of course, she won a silver medal in floor exercises in Rio. Tell our audience a little bit about her and why she's significant.
Well, again, in 2012, in the context of the London Games refusing to memorialize appropriately the Israeli athletes, that hung over the Olympic scene. In other words, this time around, the IOC did the right thing, and no one spoke about it beyond the appropriate memorial. So she took it upon herself, not only to use probably the best-known Jewish tune internationally for non-Jews as well as Jews, Hav and Nagila,
yes,
and made a point of emphasizing her Jewishness. She's a Jew. She's in the Olympics, and she's proud of her heritage.
Mm-hmm.
This time around, I do not think she used a Jewish tune in her routine, and she was just one of the best athletes in the games. And again, I don't keep track so much of how many people win or lose here, but she certainly played the game the right way.
Yes.
And look, there are a couple of other nice things that came out of the Olympics in terms of integration. For the first time, you had a black woman athlete win a gold medal in swimming, which was a step in the right direction. She made a very interesting point. She said, "I'm looking forward to the day where no one's going to notice the fact that I'm this black athlete."
Yes.
And so these are small steps in the right direction during a time mark. By the way, let's not forget, I'm putting a very small positive spin upon a very difficult time for Israel and the United States as well. Indeed, I'll make one other sports point, which is not about sports. Carmelo Anthony, who played on the Olympic basketball team, which not surprisingly, once they got their act together, blew away the competition. It's sort of interesting as a basketball fan. When he was interviewed after the game, he made a point about saying that he hopes for the American people that the Olympic success of the Americans would help bring this country together.
Yes.
And I thought it was a very nice touch on his part.
Absolutely, as well. Absolutely. You've mentioned, by the way, the African-American swimmer who won, and you have referenced already the 1936 Olympics and how there was an attempt to keep Stoller and Glickman out of the 4x4 race. The 36 Olympics, of course, belonged to Jesse Owens, and there was this, attempt by Hitler to say that the Aryan race was superior, and that the last thing he needed was for an African American, a black athlete, to just crush all others on the field. But speak to for a moment about the significance of Jesse Owens as another example of a minority that really makes an enormous statement in the context of an Olympic Games.
So the first thing I want to say about Jesse Owens is that today, simply from a sports perspective, do you know that the women are now running almost as fast as he did in 1936?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to make a prediction that the next time around, the women are going to break his record because of training and, the professionalization of the Olympics, etc. Look, as far as Owens is concerned, there are three pieces to the story. Yes, he competes and wins the 4 gold medals. Yes, he demolishes the Aryan myth of racial superiority, although the Nazis so why do they let a African-American embarrass Hitler? Well, Hitler isn't there when Owens wins his races. The way they defined Owens was he was declared to be an American auxiliary. In other words, the slave masters of America have brought over some black athletes to compete for them, so they don't really count. Mm-hmm. The last piece about Owens, which I've written about and spoken about a lot, is that when the Olympic team returns to America, and I think they have a ticker tape parade down Fifth Avenue in New York. They have a celebratory dinner at the Waldorf Astoria. And Owens is one of the honored athletes, except for one item, and that is to get to the main ballroom, he has to go up the back service elevator. So that says a tremendous amount about the status of African Americans in this country. And again, sports are community-defining situations. He is defined outside the pale, so to speak, of the American sports community, except when he's competing for America.
Yes.
That's the Jesse Owens story.
Great story, Jeff. And by the way, the name of the gold medalist winner in swimming is Simone Manuel. And again, Mazal Tov, congratulations to her. I want to go back one more time to 36 and give you a chance to speak a little bit more about Sam Stoller and, of course, Marty Glickman. Now, most Jewish sport fans know all about Marty Glickman because, as you said, he became an iconic voice first for the New York Knicks and then for the football Giants. And he also did baseball, and he became a beloved figure in the New York sports world. But he and Stoller went to the Olympics. This was their dream in 36. And most people know Glickman did not run. Stoller did not run also. One more time, just amplify that story a bit.
Well, as you know, I've been involved for many years with the American Jewish Historical Society. Before Glickman died, we published a memoir called "My Father and Me Didn't Get Our Medals," and he talked about the fact in his memoir about how, for the rest of his life, he felt terrible about how he had been discriminated against.
Yes.
Except for one thing, he returned to Berlin in the 1960s, and he said he walked through the Olympic Stadium, and he said, "You know what? I'm still here, and they're not.
Yes.
So Stoller and Glickman were NCAA champions or runners-up. They were as good as any of the other runners. I believe that on that 4x100-meter team, not only was Jesse Owens running, but Mac Robinson, Jackie Robinson's brother, was on that team.
Jeff, if I'm not mistaken, I believe that Jesse Owens and Mac Robinson only were put on the team when Stoller and Glickman were taken off.
Well, Owens' point of view was he's won his medals.
Right.
These fellas are part of the team. Let them run. But again, the alleged fear propagated by the Olympic coaches was that the Germans had in reserve these great sprinters who are going to win this important gold medal. So Stoller and Glickman were turned aside. And frankly, I've taken as my own mission to always say Sam Stoller as well as Marty Glickman.
Exactly right.
As you correctly said, Glickman was known for so many other things. And one of the sad moments of my professional life was that I was supposed to introduce Marty Glickman at a breakfast sponsored by the American Jewish Historical Society. He didn't show up, and a few weeks later he passed away. And as a New Yorker and a Knick and Giant fan, and I remembered as a youngster Glickman as an announcer. But he's an important figure in terms of American Jewish history and world Jewish history.
Yes.
I wouldn't go so far to say this is a pre-Holocaust story because it's only 1936. Mm-hmm. But it's an international definition, not of Israel, because sadly there was no state of Israel at that point, but it was a statement of where Jews stood in the mind of the world in 1936, a very difficult time. And by the way, when he came back to America, Glickman, and he could not be a member of the New York Athletic Club. In fact, there's an incident where he just wanted to train with a Gentile counterpart at the New York AC, the Winged Foot Club, and he was turned away, no Jews allowed. So that tells you a lot about where American Jews stood in the mind and attitudes of WASP America, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant America, back in those days. Today, the New York Athletic Club has people of all races, creeds, and backgrounds, and so that's a step in the right direction.
Yes. Well, as you say, we've come a long way from 1936. We've come a long way from 1972. Your piece, again, entitled by the foreword, believe it or not, the Rio Olympics were great for the Jews, great, good, whatever. The truth is you have made a marvelous contribution to our understanding and perspective of how these Olympics reflect something about the acceptance, certainly in the athletic community of the State of Israel. And I loved your piece, and I love having a chance to speak to you, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to talk to you and to be part of the JBS community. Have a good day.
Thank you, my friend. The thoughts of Dr. Jeffrey Gurock, Professor of American Jewish History at Yeshiva University. Again, he always has fascinating things to say, especially, it's not only sports. He's coming out with his book about Harlem Jewry very soon, a remake of that book, a re-editing of that book, and he'll be on in the fall discussing that. But he is so insightful when it comes to explaining how sports reflect a larger social reality. My thanks, as always, to our director, Sloan Copeland, production coordinator, Serge Goldberg, editor, Dennis Golan, JBS's associate director, Dara Golub, and the producer of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.